Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I am your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Chris Hattingh. Chris, welcome back. How are you?
Good afternoon, Nick. Afternoon, Mr. Corrigan. Doing well, thanks. Hope you guys are too. I've provided some candlelight here for today's show.
Perfect.
This is Mzansi. Gotta have it.
Indeed. And we are joined also today by Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing?
It's cold.
Yeah, but it's not as cold, thank goodness.
It's cold over the weekend, eh?
Oh, yeah. And if you're in Joburg, the end of the week is looking a bit grim too. But speaking of things that are looking grim, that is the rule of law in South Africa. And this is because former President Jacob Zuma, who has been running out of legal options with regards to his charge for contempt of court. I mean, he's allegedly running out of legal options. He always seems to invent a new one. So he got found in contempt of court by the Constitutional Court for refusing to appear at the Sonda Commission. He then went on to fight this. He was eventually taken to jail for about 20 minutes before they let him out on medical parole. That medical parole decision was then taken to the courts, where it was found to be unlawful. The IRR was also one of the parties involved in the court case there. Zuma appealed that decision to send him to that his medical parole was unlawful. And it went back to the Constitutional Court, who found that, no, it was unlawful. You really just have to go back to jail. So the correctional services have not yet given any details about how they are going to take him back into custody, or if they are going to count him as time served. I believe the original High Court ruling was a little bit vague on that and basically said the correctional services could determine whether Zuma was in fact going back to jail or not, or whether he had done time served, which is a very strange decision if the decision to let him out of jail was unlawful. But anyway, but it looks like he should go back to jail. That seems to be the kind of way the wind is blowing on this one. However, very conveniently, Jacob Zuma has revealed through his foundation that he's in fact in Russia at the moment for medical treatment and will return to South Africa when he feels better. ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula said that no one wants to see anyone at the age of 80 going to jail, but in this instance, the law is the law. The security cluster, its job is to maintain law and order and to ensure that nothing can culminate to acts of economic sabotage, lawlessness, because those acts tarnish the authority of the state, he also said. Then that the ANC was calling for calm. Chris, let me start with you. Is indeed the law in this case? Are we likely to see Jacob Zuma in jail anytime soon?
That kind of feels like a loaded question, so I don't appreciate you throwing it to me. Many assumptions and questions therein. I think highly unlikely that the president will end up in jail again, and mostly because there are no extradition treaties between South Africa and Russia of which I'm aware. So if the South African government were to take that route, I don't see that happening. But also, why wouldn't he simply remain in Russia to obtain this medical treatment that he can only receive there? Maybe he could come back once we get the NHI, then you could receive a similar level of healthcare that he would then get in Russia. You could then get it in South Africa, for example. But for him and his whole strategy of delay and that sort of thing, I mean, yeah, don't put it past him, even in his more advanced years, that he wouldn't have planned this for a while and seen this sort of thing coming. That's why it also helps to be overseas. And then from the ANC side, obviously it helps for optics to say the law is the law. But given their actions over the last, 30 years, very much don't have much of a leg to stand on in that regard. So it could help a little bit with some of their supporters to say, see, no one is above the law. The party respects the rule of law. But whether anyone believes that is another matter entirely.
Right. So while no extradition treaty does exist between South Africa and Russia, it is within, I believe, the powers of the presidents to make a request to each other. So Cyril could presumably request Vladimir Putin to look into this case and then do a sort of case-by-case extradition.
It's not maybe when Putin comes for the BRICS summit.
Well, that would be the great opportunity, wouldn't it? So, Terence, considering that South Africa has been, being very nice to Russia in recent months, despite all the international pressure not to do so, do you think Cyril Ramaphosa is likely at all to ask Putin whether we could arrange some kind of extradition here? Because I assume that Zuma will never come back to South Africa. That's my assumption as well.
Look, I think that if he does come back, it will be after an extended absence. Certainly let the issue die down. Then we can come back and we can, have a court case to review the court case. I believe this is actually about a contempt of court finding. This isn't even the big, an arms deal conviction.
Exactly, the corruption case is still going through the court process.
So this is essentially this is almost just a procedural issue. I actually think it serves Ramaphosa's interests quite neatly to have him in Russia, where the South African state just can't arrest him because, well, he's in a sovereign country. And no, I don't imagine President Ramaphosa is going to prevail upon Comrade Putin to surrender South Africans, medical refugee / fugitive from justice / former president, head of state, great baritone singer, whatever, however you want to describe him. Because I think this extricates Ramaphosa from a thorny problem. I don't think that there is a huge amount of sympathy on Ramaphosa's part for Zuma. But I think that there is sufficient within his own party that this is kind of a bit toxic for him. If he's out of the country and beyond the nominal reach of our law enforcement agencies, we can shrug our shoulders and say there's nothing we can do. And I think that's pretty much how he will play it. In fact, I suspect that if there is any communication, and I don't think there would be, but I think he might actually be quite amenable to President Zuma just sojourning there, on a Sochi resort for the next 6 months to a year until the issue has kind of disintegrated in the general morass that is South African politics.
And after the elections, of course. But it's clear that something untoward has been done here. As part of his medical parole, Zuma should have surrendered his passport. So it needs to be investigated how precisely he got out of the country, passport, and how he got into Russia without a passport. Or was his passport never, in fact, taken from him? Chris, your thoughts on this?
Perhaps via the Lady R?
Ha ha ha. Well, yes, maybe that was the secret cargo that was actually being taken.
I don't know. Or that other airplane that stopped at Waterkloof as well. I don't know.
I suspect that this is as simple as his passport was never confiscated, because
I suspect that's the case, yeah.
there was a news report that said he had flown there commercially, along with I think 6 bodyguards. It's great when buy one get 6 for free. Maybe one doesn't trust the Russian security services these days, especially since the attack dogs have now been sent over to Belarus. So yeah, maybe you got to bring your own. But I think that this is the zone in which incompetence, indifference, and special treatment just intersect. So right. Yeah, you could also ask, why no customs official seeing President Zuma, didn't think to question this. Many people get stopped, trying to leave countries on far, far less.
Indeed. And I think it's going to reveal very shortly the reality here, which is that, as you say, this is actually probably beneficial to Cyril. He doesn't have to deal with this issue anymore because he can just say, "Oh, it's not my fault. It's poor Russia. We can't do anything about it. I was shocked that this happened." Whereas the reality, he probably could do something about this and get Zuma back and actually get him on trial, or at least in jail for the things he has already done, and presumably on trial for the things that we suspect that he's very likely to have done, like the corruption stuff, which is dodged for what, 20 years now.
I would be very, very surprised if Zuma ever sees the inside of a court to answer any substantive charges.
Right. And I think now that this is, I suspect that he's not going to come back from Russia. That's my feeling here. He's a pretty old guy. And his daughter and some of his family in particular have been very publicly close to the Russian state during the Ukraine war. So I wonder whether he's maybe cut some sort of deal. But anyway, that's just speculation on my part. I don't have any real evidence for that. But let's move on to our next story. And this is about the state of our politics. We do these every now and again. And we had the ANC's leader in KZN, Beki Motolo, saying a large number of things. But one of the more controversial things he said was, well, firstly, that he didn't think that power outages were going to affect the ANC's prospects when it came to the election, which I think is a controversial claim. But then he made a probably more reasonable claim, which is that the people of South Africa don't care about pala pala. He said, quote, "They will tell you we don't have water. In my household, people are unemployed. The sewer is leaking. Only the ANC speaks about these issues. The opposition speaks about pala pala and moonshot pacts. They are not addressing what affects society. Even with load shedding, they are drumming a lot. People are not raising it as a key matter. It's unemployment, poverty, and the cost of living. And it's only the unions that raise the matter of the cost of living. There are people who may not vote because they believe in the government, but they will vote in the interests of their country. They will say, let's keep the ANC above 50+1 because we have seen what has happened in the metros. The consequences of coalition governments are greater than the dissatisfaction we have. In 2024, there will be two votes. Those who vote for the political party they love and those who are voting for the stability of their country. Those voters include the white community," he explained. He also then went on to say that it was impossible to run a coalition without 45% of the vote in any particular area, and that this is why the IFP and DA together, even in KZN, won't be able to do anything with a coalition there because together they're likely to get less than 45% of the vote, he claims. Terence, do you think he's right? I mean, there's a bunch of claims in there, so pick whichever ones you think, but do you think he's right about any of this?
You know, once again, I find myself having to, resort to that great font of political wisdom, Oliver Stone's movie JFK, where I think Senator Long says to Jim Garrison, those Warren Commission boys are picking that shit out of pepper, because I rather think that I'm having to do the same thing. Yeah. Okay. So do people not care about these things? No, they care. But let's just say that South Africa's people have a high tolerance for incompetence and corruption. We were just talking about former President Zuma. Let us not forget he was extremely popular, even though he had a cumulonimbus cloud above his head. I don't, but yeah, I think because that's sort of become almost baked in. There's no its impact would be less than one might expect in a serious country. I think that when he talks about load shedding, are people raising it? Once again, I think that the issue there is more complex. When people talk about unemployment, well, factor in the fact that South Africa is not a great investment destination because you can't keep your machines running, I wonder how much investment we get is actually people putting up solar panels or their own generation because they can't rely on the state to which they pay their taxes. So I think until you can get that reasonably sorted out, that unemployment issue is just going to fester. As far as the coalitions go, that's an interesting one, because I've seen this a couple of times. In fact, I made a modest contribution to a piece that Marius mostly wrote, responding to Melanie in part to something Melanie Verwoerd wrote in News 24, where she was also decrying the prospects for coalitions. And it almost seems that there's a mindset here that we are going to choose the ANC or we're going to choose coalitions. I don't think this is so much a choice as the inevitable direction our politics is heading into. The question is only, is only going to be, can we make coalitions work? As far as instability goes, there is the ANC's inept handling of the country, not least. It's meddling in the civil service to the point that the civil service is now dysfunctional. Has been far more destabilizing than the inability to form a durable government in Johannesburg. Now, and that's serious enough. I think the idea that the ANC isn't talking, sort of refuses to consider this, or believes that they're still going to walk through the door. Well, maybe they will, but I think that the time is rapidly coming when they won't be able to do that. They're going to have to decide how they handle it. On the 45%, look, I think that a coalition would in principle need to be able to get over that 50% hurdle. And the more components, it's like the more complex a machine becomes because of all the moving parts. So yes, if it's two large parties together, they can get over 50%. But I suspect what he's saying, and you need 45%, is that the ANC must get at least 45 so that it can call the shots.
Right.
Maybe, look, it's still a lot of water to go under the bridge. Maybe they can still pull this off this time. But then again, still they are at the mercy of the 5 or 6% that they need to take them over.
So added to this is some comments by Fikile Mbalula. He said a bunch of things recently. One of them is that the ANC should review its coalition agreements with the EFF in the Gauteng metros, and that it's not particularly happy with the way things are going. And that echoes some things that have come, especially out of the Ekurhuleni ANC, who have been very unhappy with their coalition agreements with the EFF. So, Chris, my first question to you is do you think the EFF ANC coalition is going to fall apart before 2024? But on top of that, Fikile Mbalula also went on to say that, as Terence talked about briefly here, he's very confident that the ANC is in fact going to get more than 50% of the vote come 2024, and that they're not even considering talking to any parties about coalitions because they are so keen on victory. Now, I think all the polling, there's been some polling which shows the ANC at about 52% of the vote, I think was the highest, but most of it seems to be between about 45 and 50. So if the polling holds, which it may not, the ANC is kind of looking at something below 50%. Do you think Mbalula is being too optimistic here for his party's chances?
For a party that doesn't think much of the possibility of coalition government, the ANC spends an awful lot of time talking about it and devoting energy and thought to what agreement should we have in place? What would the requirements be? Is it proportional? Who gets what? All this sort of stuff, all these resources being spent in terms of actions, I think trying to preempt some things maybe in advance. It's interesting also not categorically ruling out working with the DA that the ANC would have in the past. As soon as there's criticism of BEE, for example, it's the worst criticism of core ANC ideology and sort of a pillar of ANC proposals and plans. And now maybe the party realizing how badly things are trending for it in terms of election results, possibly next year, that they're not ruling out working with the DA. But also, I think, in a way, wanting to put the DA in a bit of a corner, because for the DA, they've declared the EFF as enemy number one, public enemy number one. So in that way, now, are you willing to work with the ANC or not? In terms of the polling, seeing the ANC between 45 and 50, I don't think as low maybe as 45 or as low as many people hope, even below 40%. Still very sticky support in certain areas, so don't discount that. But it depends now maybe what these so-called opposition coalition parties can bring together and work on. We're going to see a coalition convention conference in the next month, I think. So we'll see what sort of things come from that. The parties that participate, if they now start to present a coherent vision to voters and a coherent idea of what they could deliver. Even last week, we had the IFP and the DA signing this service delivery pact in KZN. Maybe that points to a sort of direction that these kinds of things could go, at least initially, focus on some basics and then build from there. Just on the Lula himself, I think, playing the Secretary General role very well. Every week, pretty much, there's between 10 and 20 stories just about him and the ANC, and sort of this idea of PR and being in the conversation and putting things on your terms. Don't discount the sort of work that goes into that and wanting to be at the forefront. I mean, it's not always going to be positive, of course. It is the former minister of many roles and many failed portfolios. But nonetheless, you still sort of dominate the conversation. So that could be part of the wider strategy, I think.
Terence, what do you make of the health of the ANC EFF coalition?
I think that there's an interesting dynamic in the sense that the ANC and the EFF are not too far apart ideologically. Although I would say the ANC is probably a lot more heterodox. I think at one stage, it was come one, come all, and home for all, lots of goodies to go around. I think that the concern that someone like Fikile Mbalula has now, and I think that he was actually personally quite friendly with Malema. So maybe this is where this comes from, is that I think that there are many in the ANC who are afraid that the EFF are going to be better at this than they are, and they're going to eat their own lunch. And you sort of it's like getting into bed with a succubus. It's very attractive until she eats you. This is possibly what they are concerned about, the possibility of some sort of reverse takeover.
It does seem to be the fault line that is emerging between the ANC factions, which is over whether to wholly embrace the EFF or whether to maybe hold out for something else.
Look, I will say this, and if you'll forgive me, coming back to the article Morris and I published, Ms. Verwoerd, and she's not alone in this, often admonishes the DA, they have to be willing to work with the ANC. But last week, the ANC in Gauteng had a conference on local government, and Panyaza Lesufi was explicit that they are not supporting the Al Jamar mayors because they are because they like them. They're doing it specifically because this is against the DA. Now it's very interesting. The DA was always attacked for being too negative or whatever, but this seems to be very much in that mold. And he pledged that basically their strategic thinking is that they want to keep the DA out no matter what. So on the one hand, it seems that even if in absolute terms they might not be wild about working with the EFF, that certainly seems to be the way the Gauteng people are moving. On national level, it might well look very different. I think ironically, the possibility of some sort of marriage of, or deal of convenience between the DA and the ANC, I just don't see it being possible. And I think, very ironically, once again, it might have been possible with the ANC that existed under Mandela or under Mbeki. Just think you had a great deal more pragmatism and just a much higher quality of thinking. Of course, they never even had to think about that because their numbers were as they were. But yeah, now when pragmatic solutions, I think, have kind of seeped into the sewer.
Indeed. All right, let's move on to, I think, our last story for today. Terence, you wrote a piece which appeared in the dailyfriend.co.za. So do check out the dailyfriend.co.za. There's always some good stuff on there. About Build One SA, which is the political party started by Musi Maimane.
Yes.
And you had a meeting with them, and you had some observations about the party. So can you tell us a little bit about what you wrote and what your thoughts are on that party?
Yeah, look, I see that in the comments some of my readers don't like what I had to say. You can't have everything you want in this world. I'm I'm old enough to remember the late 1980s when it was evident something was going to have to give, and I think that, and I don't know, I get the same intuition now. Now maybe this is all false consciousness, and maybe I watched too much 24 and Homeland, and I'm given to conspiracy theories, and I've seen JFK too many times. But I do think that we do seem to be on the cusp of some sort of turning point. Now what's intrigued me about some of these new parties is not that they say anything particularly new, but that perhaps they are sort of entering this this crack in history that lets their offering be received in a way that wasn't possible before. Now, BOSA, I think, is sort of hitting on the idea of civil society, citizen engagement, new, almost apolitical politics, talking very much about coalitions. So I thought, well, let me go and talk to them. I don't have to agree with everyone to have a conversation. It's something that I think many of us in this country could learn. You don't top tip everyone. You don't have to agree with everyone to talk to them. In fact, it's when you don't agree that you actually want to talk. Yeah, simple stuff. I could do a Jordan Peterson podcast like this. I must say I came away with sort of mixed views. On the one hand, I think that I met their deputy leader in Ubuntu, Hlazo Webster. I found her very engaged, very articulate. There's no doubting the passion, and they believe that they're onto a good ticket. They're talking about having wide-ranging consultations, which is very South African. It's the kind of thing we've heard before. But I do think that they are in a space where there is a lot of disaffection, and perhaps there is a constituency, particularly, as I say, young people who haven't voted, who might who are looking for an alternative, and perhaps this is it. Where I think their big problem is going to arise is in the following: that they're talking about this like groundswell support, local leaders, people who are offering very specific constituencies, local leaders, activists, etc. That's all well and good. And I think if we were talking about geographically delineated constituencies, which real electoral reform was supposed to have delivered, from the 1990s, not the kind of malicious compliance that we've seen, where we're going to like treat each province as a constituency. In other words, we're going to like snip a little bit at the edge. That sort of model could be viable. My concern, and I expressed this to her, at some level, at some time, you're going to have to rank these people on lists. Now, if you're representing community A or whatever, you're a number one. Your people, have their have their guy in parliament. If you're number 15 on that list, well, your prospects diminish significantly. That's about going beyond these personal attributes into creating a brand identity. Now, she said, she conceded that was a point, and said, well, this is something they're going to have to wrestle with, and I watch with interest as to how they will. I can't help getting away from something, and it's something that actually came up in the conversation, that there does seem to be a very almost religious impulse behind this, and not surprising, I think, given that Musi Maimane was a pastor in his church, and Ubuntu apparently also has some background there. But maybe they will make a splash. She says, we've got to learn to do coalitions, which I found refreshing. So, and they've nailed their colors to the mast. They want the presidency, which I also find refreshing. You're not sitting there in this, faux, not me. I will only come if the people ask me. I think there was a bit of defaulting to that sort of thing. Well, we'll do what the people tell us. I think a party has to lead as opposed to just take direction. But yes, it does seem to be an interesting model that I think is worth keeping an eye on. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But
No, I think I share a lot of your concerns about the model. Although the idea of getting civil society more engaged in politics, I think is a good one, particularly outside of the ANC's orbit. Chris, your thoughts on Build One SA and how it's looking so far?
Yeah, time will tell if the sort of groundwork has been done. I mean, one talks about the sort of consultations and things, but what do you do with those, and how do you act upon them to sort of actualize or concretize them in a way that you can then see the impact thereof? Even in certain areas, doesn't have to be nationally completely, but maybe certain metros or certain more minute geographic locations. So let's see what happens with that. Some of the risk here, of course, is that some of these movements or ideas eventually get co-opted back into this idea of we can reform the ANC, support the ANC in this broader umbrella, just go with, Ramaphosa again, New Dawn 3.0, whatever. I'm not saying that BOSA will do that. I'm just worried about sort of that incentive or that inclination possibly, because that's a way for you to get international government to make more of an impact nationally, sort of short-term wins in that way. So I'm hoping that doesn't happen. Let's see if the intentions and the aims are correct based on real actions. Yeah, let's see where it goes from there. But it's messy for the time being. But overall, the sort of maturation of South African democracy, perhaps it's not as clean cut as many of us want it to be. We want maybe some blocks, some clearly defined blocks. Tell me who to vote for. Give me 5 points. Blah blah blah. It's not going to be like that, I think, at any point anymore in the future.
And it's going to be a little bit difficult to poll too, right? Because, when you're going to have, 5 parties splitting 15% of the vote, let's just say, it's going to be kind of difficult when you do a national poll to kind of hone in accurately, because the margin of error, a lot of those parties will be within the margin of error. And so it'll be difficult to predict precisely how well each individual one is going to do. So in polling, we might see something more like the non-main parties, the non-IFP, EFF, DA, and ANC parties getting some significant chunk, but it'll be very difficult to actually work out within that chunk what each party is going to get. But I'd be very interested to see if BOSA does show up in any polling as we get closer to the election.
Look, I understand that BOSA itself doesn't seem to be making much of a splash, but it's also quite new, and I think also the business model, if you like, maybe doesn't give it an easy in. Although I do understand that that Maimane personally has registered quite strongly in some polling about favorability, future president, and that sort of thing. And I see someone says, does the Capitalist Party still exist? As far as I'm aware, it does not. And I think that is actually a big warning note, because if Twitter was South African politics,
the EFF
the purple cows would have. Well, the EFF and the purple cows would have split the vote in the last election.
All right. That is all the time we have for today. So thank you very much for listening. We hope that you found it interesting, and we'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Also, we're planning to have an episode on Friday this week for the first time. So
making us work.
Keep a lookout for that. I know I'm a malevolent taskmaster. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day.